Testing. What's up? I'm Jacob Blitzo, your Elixir Mentor, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Elixir Mentor Podcast. This is where we discuss everything related to Elixir, from interviews with enthusiasts, pioneers in the community, to innovative projects and libraries shaping Elixir's future. Today is a very special episode. We have José Valim, the creator of Elixir, joining us today to help celebrate its 12th birthday. So José, welcome, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
I think this is going to be a fun chat, and we have a lot of people tuning in already, and we got chat. Let's see if the chat is working on the screen. It is. So we got a lot of hellos from all over the world, so that's exciting. And we have Brazil, which is a very popular country for some reason with you.
Right? Yeah. So Howard's had Bluebird Day. What is a Bluebird Day?
A Bluebird Day is when it's, well, at least what I think a Bluebird Day is when you still have snow in the mountain and you can ski, but the sun is out.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's
That's
a good
nice
winter day, right?
Yeah.
So, José, the 12th birthday, that's a long time.
Yes. I have two kids and Elixir, well, if you count Elixir 3, and Elixir is the oldest. So it's funny, right? Like, so today, I had an alarm for like Elixir anniversary. Like not an alarm, like I have it's an event on my calendar, like a yearly event, right? And then my 10-year-old, he came and he saw like, oh, like today is Alex's birthday. And I was like, yes. And then he's like, how old is it? I'm like, is it? And then I was like 12, and then I was like, older than me. And I'm like, yeah, that's true, that's correct. Older than
You're
me.
firstborn. It's a programming language,
Yeah.
not a human.
Yeah.
So, when you started this, did you ever imagine you would be where you are today? Did you ever think you'd have this fantastic community built around it and all these amazing tools and everything just surfacing?
Yeah, so this is going to sound weird, but it's with caveats. But I say like I don't think too much about the future, like or maybe the way it is like I don't think too much about the future as like a destination. It's like, oh, this is where I want to be. For me, it's much more, I think about the future much more of like a road. I know like the things I want to do, I know the directions I want to explore, but I really don't set in my head like, oh, this is what I want to have, this is what I want to get to, this is what I want us to be, right? Because I mean, it's hard. Like I generally like don't like, like setting up expectations, both like from myself and other people, because then you end up into this whole job of managing expectations, both yourself and from other people. So, and you can see that like being reflected in a lot of the work as well. So, for example, with the type system work that we're probably going to talk more about it, but that has been happening for a while. I never really say like this is what we want to get. It's always about like, look, this is what we are doing, this is what we're exploring, this is the direction we are going to, and we are going to see where we want to get. So it has always been like that. I never really thought about like size, of like community projects, right? Because it's very easy also like to set up like if you're also like always thinking about like if you're like setting up goals or like objectives, it becomes like in a way like kind of hard like to enjoy the road, because you're like, oh, like we can achieve all those amazing things that we have achieved, and it'll be like, oh, but I did not reach my goal, right? And you can also get addicted, right? Like when you reach a goal, you're going to say like, oh, my next thing is set up the next goal, and then you're only chasing goals.
Yeah, that's the
So there are a
problem.
bunch of reasons. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're never happy with your success. It's probably a good way to approach it, because you probably wouldn't be where you are today if you set your expectations of where you want it to be too, because I think that's what like leads to a lot of people's burnout, and you know, they get depressed and they're not happy where they are and they give up on projects.
Yeah. Yeah, like, I know it's like, in a way, it's kind of disappointing when people are like, "Oh, have you thought about it?" And I'm like, "No, I actually did not think about it." I've tried to stay like, and you also don't want like, and in a way, you all like, I also want to make the design decisions. Like, I want to make changes to the language or promote projects in the ecosystem, because I I feel, or even better, I can argue that that's the important thing. And it's not because, oh, we are doing that because we want to be popular, or we want to be big, or we want to get to a certain size, right? The hope is that we will make the correct decisions, the correct choices, and then everything is going to come as a consequence of that. Sometimes it's going to be fast, sometimes it's going to be slow, but we are making the correct design, the correct choices.
Yeah, I love that. When you go back to like your very first commit to GitHub, what was your goal? What was the problem you were trying to solve? And what were you starting back then that is probably way different than it is today?
Yeah, actually, um, let's do something interesting. Can you share a screen easily?
I can
Like you?
share my screen easily, but it might be hard to share yours.
No, no, you can share yours. Yeah.
Okay.
So like, let's go to GitHub. Maybe I can see your screen. If not, I'll go
Okay,
to your
one
screen as well.
second. The one thing that sucks is I might lose you if I share my screen.
Really? Like,
Just because I
just the
don't have it
video?
set up on OBS.
Okay. No, it's all
um,
right then.
all
No,
right,
it's all right.
well, I'll pull up GitHub and I'll just verbalize everything. I think that'll be the best.
Yeah, everybody can do it. So I'll do that
Yeah.
as well.
All right, so we're going to
So
github.com and we're pulling
yeah,
up the.
I can send the link in the chat, but I want everybody to go like to the, because it's 12 years like since Elixir 0.5, and Sasha Yurich, he was just asking this on Twitter, and I want to pull like Elixir 0.5.0, the tag on GitHub, and I want us to look at it, right? Because I mean, what I like to say, this may not be true, but what I like to think is that, so this marks Elixir anniversary, because this was because the repository existed for like almost a year and a half,
Mhm.
um, but it was quite different from, yeah, I'm going to give everybody the links. So but in the first 1.5 year of Elixir, it was like quite different than Elixir is today, right? So, and then with time it grew. So let me pick something here that we can take a look. Uh yeah, this is actually okay. One, to get started, and this is actually amazing. Okay, so I'm going to send a link. So check this one out. So this is the keyword I sent to the chat. I think everybody can see it. So this is the keyword module in Elixir 0.5.
Zero.
And so this is 12 years old. Okay, can you see it?
I'm trying to pull it up. I don't think YouTube will let the link go through, which is a bummer.
Really? Okay.
Unless, is everyone seeing it? Let me see if it went through. No, it didn't go through in the chat. Now,
If you send it, would it go through?
maybe if I send it, yeah. Let me try to see if I can find the
Yeah,
initial commit
yeah,
here.
I sent you the link on our stream channel. I should uh
Oh, cool. Perfect. That
yeah,
I have.
and maybe,
And maybe
yeah.
I can send it in the chat. Let's try it.
Yes, I got it.
Boom. All right.
Yeah, so if everybody opens up like that file, it's actually amazing how close it is already to the Elixir that we use today. Like, can you see it?
I do. I am looking at it right now.
Right? It's like we already have all the documentation things like module doc and doc. The function definitions, they all look the same. Like, I think this code would almost compile as is today. I can only find a couple things that are not, that would not work today. So like on line 84,
84.
we have default arguments, and we can see that back then the default arguments used two like forward slashes, and today default arguments are like two backward slashes.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, so that's one. And I think the only other thing that would not work is on line 114. We did not have for, we had LC, which standard for like list comprehensions. So we would
Okay.
write LC pattern in the thing, and then later, and when we had LC, it was like a list comprehension. You could only have a list as the thing you would traverse. And we also had BC for binary comprehensions. And then later we unified everything in a for, and the for also allows you to traverse any enumerable. So we changed this. But outside like those two small changes, right? Like very small, right? Like this would just work, I think. I think this would just work, which is impressive, really. Like 12 years. This was like before 1.0. This was like 2 solid years before 1.0.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
How
So
did you like when you first started this? I'm guessing it was just you, or did you have other people helping you at the time?
when I started it, it was just me. But yeah, yeah. Maybe if we go for the GitHub history back then, we are going to see other people helping, or maybe not. I'm going for the history here, and there are some contributions. So Rafael França, who is a member of the Rails core team, and we worked together at the time. We can see some commits from him and some commits
Okay.
from other contributors. But yeah, it was mostly me.
Like, how
Mostly
did
me.
you even begin to like organize your thoughts and like how did you begin to design Elixir and the syntax and what you wanted to see behind it?
Yeah, so yes, so yeah, that's a very good question. So so the whole you asked how it started, and I completely ignored the question. So now going back to that, so it really started like, so I was part of the Rails core team, and and when I before I joined the Rails team, so this was like to this was so before I was doing Rails. Before I joined the Rails team, we were already hearing a lot about concurrency, right? And there were efforts for making Rails run on machines with multiple cores. And eventually I joined like the Rails core team. And there is an issue. I think it's probably like the most traumatizing issue of uh of my life, because it's like 14 years later or something, and I still remember it, which is somebody opened up an issue that, so they had a Rails. So Rails was already improving how to run Rails under multiple cores in production, right? And then somebody opened up an issue, and the issue was something like this: look, uh, we have uh, we have a Rails app running in production, and then um, we have auto scaling enabled. But when we have a spike in requests, auto scale kicks in and starts a new instance, and that instance cannot boot properly. It errors. It not always. It may error while booting. And the reason that happened is because when auto scale kicked in because of high performance, right? There were a lot of requests coming in, and the application was like lazily initializing stuff. And then during that process, you would have like data races or a race condition because this user was using multiple cores that would make things blow up, right? And then when you get a bug report like that, you're like, all right, like, I want to fix this. But I cannot, like, how I'm going to reproduce it, right? And after I reproduce it, like, how I'm going to fix it and make sure that the fix is correct and it's not going to have regressions. So that was a point that was like, look, if concurrency is going to become the future, and I like to say it has become the future today, right? Like today you can have like a wristwatch with 4 cores, right? So if concurrency is going to become the future, we we probably have better tools for dealing with those problems that I was trying to solve. And I started just to study. Like my initial reaction was like, I want to figure out how people are tackling this problem, and then um, bring those solutions to Ruby, Rails, whatever. I want to learn what is out there and bring those things in. And I like to say, like, in this journey, there were like two moments where, like, I say points of no return that completely changed like how I write software. And the first one was when I found functional programming. And functional programming means a lot of different things like object orientation. People are going to get that to mean different things. But to me, it was all about immutability, right? Because one of the issues that we would frequently have in Rails regarding those concurrency issues is like, well, what happens when you have um, two threads because you have multiple cores? So you have threads running different cores running at the same time. What happens if they try to change the same place in memory, right? And that's like a big cause of a lot of the problems. And then functional programming is like, well, what if we don't change things in memory? What if everything is immutable by default? And then I was like, this is fantastic. It's like a bunch of the problems that I was trying to fix. If I use this technique, right? All the problems they are just going to disappear. Boom, like the problem is gone. And then I was like, okay, this is great. Like, so I was like, immutability, I am all in, right? And today for me, it's like it's not really only about like concurrency. It's really about like the software. If you're not mutating things, right? Like the software is also easier to understand because you're no longer like you pass an object to another object, and that object is going to change the other object in ways that you actually don't know. Everything is hidden from you, and that makes the code harder to understand. While in Elixir, everything goes in, everything comes out, right? You can reason about the flow of the data, right? Which is the most important part of our program. Like our program is always working on data that becomes super clear. So, so that was one point, and then the other point was, and then I was like, okay, functional programming, I'm in, and then I started studying a bunch of different functional programming languages. I found Erlang, fell in love with it, and started playing with it, writing some programs to learn more. And eventually, I was like, okay. The way I like to say is that I loved everything I found in Erlang, but I hated the things that I was missing. There were a couple features that for me, I was like, I really want those features. And at the beginning, so if you go like at the very beginning of the Elixir repository, so I was like, I love Erlang. I'm missing some features. But being mostly a Ruby developer, when I started playing with Elixir, so if you go back there, I was like, I missed some things. And I was coming from Ruby, and I was like, well, I guess I miss objects. So if you go like to the first commits of Elixir, like the first 2 months or something like that, like more than 1 year before 0.5, it was actually object oriented, right? Because I felt that I want to do a couple things, and I felt that object orientation was the answer for the things I wanted to do. It also had like a completely different way of doing meta programming as well. And then, so I worked on this prototype of Elixir for like 3 to 4 months, and it was really bad, really, really bad, right? But that's how I started, right? I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just exploring ideas, and I tried a couple things, and they were really bad. And then I actually barely committed on it for like 5 to 6 months, potentially even longer. And I continued studying other programming languages, other platforms. And then with time, I could understand what are the things that I was missing. So when I thought, oh, what I'm missing is an object, it's like, no, it was not an object that I was missing. I was actually missing polymorphism, with which today in Elixir we represent it with protocols. So I was missing that form of extensible polymorphism. I just didn't know at the time. So I was not really missing object. I was missing like one property that object-oriented languages give to you, right? And then I was like, okay, I know that this is the thing that I want. So how am I going to implement this in the Erlang virtual machine? And then like, oh, I want metaprogramming, but what would be the best way of doing metaprogramming in the Erlang virtual machine? And I was like, oh, I want something that is closer to Lisp programming languages. So that was the moment where I was able to go from like I was able to translate like what I felt was missing into something that I could actually implement and make it part of the language. And and I think Elixir 0.5 was probably the first version that had those big ideas in there. I'm almost sure we had protocols in there. We probably had macros. Yeah, we did have protocols and we did have macros. Yeah, so all those things they were there in place, and that's the Elixir we have today. And I think, and it's still like today, people, after Elixir started, I mean, it has been 12 years. Erlang has also like evolved a lot, and I still think today, like those are the two biggest differences to Erlang. Still, is this idea of protocols um, and the metaprogramming system.
Yeah, I love that. What, like, when you were searching around, what other languages were you investigating before you even found Erlang too? And then you saw the
So
potential in it too.
yeah, so for me, like there is a book called Seven Languages in 7 Weeks from Bruce Tate, which for me, like I was studying a bunch of things, but I really loved the book when I read it because it gave me a summary of a lot of the things that I was reading, right? And to me, it's like when I read that book, it just made it super clear that Erlang was the thing, right? But I was really, um, putting my hands in pretty much everything that I could learn and read. So I'm not going to remember everything in the book. So the book starts with more traditional OO languages, I believe, and then I think it talks about Erlang, Haskell, Scala, Clojure. I think so. And so all of those, like the big functional programming languages at the time, and even like to weird things. So there's this small programming language. Sorry, I just called it weird. That's not what I meant. Not weird in the sense of like more in the sense of like more weird in the sense of unknown, not weird. But
It's
there's
okay.
like the
Let everyone
Frank.
know how you feel.
Yeah, it's like there's the Frank programming language, which I think it has really interesting ideas. I haven't seen elsewhere about how to make units a first class property of a programming language, like units of measure,
Hmm.
right? So it has a really interesting approach to data types. So at the time, I was really like, I was trying to absorb as much as I can with a big filter that I had, which was like, well, I'm looking at those things. Uh, would they make sense in their language virtual machine? Right. So it's like I would go read those things and then I would, so, maybe I would get a book this thick. And then at the end, I would have like 10 or 20% of it to be like, oh, those are things that could potentially work well on the Erlang virtual machine. Right. So there was like this filter, and then at the end I had to look at all those things and say, okay, which are the features and properties that I actually want to make part of the language, right? So if you look like at Elixir, especially at the beginning and the discussions, they are like there are features coming. I like to say the three big influences are Erlang, Clojure, and Ruby. um, but you're going to find like influences from Haskell, influences from F sharp, um, some from Scala as well. The whole doc testing obviously inspired by Python. So there's like a little bit of everything.
I love that. So Elixir was kind of my first taste where I fully jumped into like a functional paradigm. And I struggled because I tried to push like the object oriented functionality into the functional language so hard just because my brain was wired that way. Because I came from, like Node.js and like Swift. I did a little iOS development too and a lot of back end stuff. But I pushed against the functional paradigm so much. But the reason I was working with Elixir is like it had everything that I wanted. I just didn't know how to use it properly. But when it finally clicks and you start, using the strength of like, immutability and all of that, like everything just writes so much cleaner and you write just better code that just performs.
Yeah, and the thing is, like nobody really should feel bad about that, because like I'm literally saying that I went for that same journey, right? I went for the journey where I was like, oh, I feel I feel what is missing, like what this code needs is more objects, right? And then it takes time for you to realize, no, that's not what it needs, right? And I gave a keynote recently at at Elixir conference in Europe about like design patterns in
Dude,
Elixir,
that
and a
talk
good
was
chunk.
so good, by the way. I
Thank you,
I will
thank
link
you.
it in the description of this stream for everyone afterwards because I feel like it's a must listen.
Thank you. Yeah, and and a lot of it was like trying to break down, like what those things are, and what how they are different, and potentially how you should think about those things. Because yes, it's not obvious, right? It takes time for you to understand how those things map together. But I think after you understand it, it really, it, I mean, like really for me, like when I see it, like I talk about this in the talk, but when I see objects, I really see like the coupling of several things that I may not necessarily want to be coupled at all. And that helps a lot for you to reason about the code.
Yeah. Yeah, when I finally was able to embrace the functional paradigm is when I started writing a lot better Elixir code. And what's funny is like I'm new to this. I've been only writing Elixir code for like three and a half years, and I had a buddy that was telling me for years that I need to check out Elixir. And I was like, yeah, I'm sure it's awesome. It's so cool. But I was like, I don't have time to learn another language right now. And then I finally, when I started a project where it made sense, I finally put in the time and started learning. And then I feel like the learning curve was really hard for me because I'm decent at like reading documentation and picking things up. And I think you just said this too in an interview I just saw. You're like a very impatient learner where you like start to learn and then you have to just go and do it. I'm very much the same. Like I have to go break things on my own and just start building it. I started a master's degree in software engineering and we were doing everything in Java and everything was slow. I had all these projects that I wanted to build and me learning in school is taking too long. So I ended up just self-teaching myself everything. And I just hit the ground running and then dropped out of my master's program. But I forgot where I was going with this. But anyways, I feel like I was the same way. And I started building my own platform in Elixir. But I rewrote a lot of code. So there's a lot of pain points. And that's kind of where what kind of like pushed me to start my YouTube channel. I was like, we need a YouTube channel to show tutorials, like not only Elixir basics, but like how to build real projects. And there was some stuff out there, but it was hard to find. And so I started doing that like, I think 2 years ago now. And recording my first video was the scariest thing I ever did. I was like, the internet trolls are going to come for me and tear me apart. And that didn't happen. So
Yeah.
now it's like turned into this thing where it was just kind of like such a fun little side thing to help me polish my skills. And now it's turning into something where like everyone that watches me and is in the Elixir community, they're just awesome and supportive people that just want to hang out and learn with you. And I think it's a really cool I feel like Elixir has built something incredibly special that isn't seen in a lot of other like tech circles. Because I think there's a lot of, I don't want to say angry people, but they're quick to like tear people down, and I feel like you see that less around the Elixir community.
Yeah, that's you know for sure the community tries to to be very welcoming, which is something that I like from the very beginning, something that I was worried about, like going back, like to the things like I expected, but something from the very beginning is that I knew we were kind of asking for anybody who wants to learn Elixir. I knew we're kind of asking a lot from that person, right? Because we were like, okay, we want you to talk about functional programming, right? And we want you to think about concurrency, potentially distribution, potentially think about like fault tolerance. There are like so many things that we are asking a, a person to learn, or habits to unlearn to be part of our community, that we our only option really, if we want to have a community in the first place, is to be welcoming.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise people, they're just going to like, oh, this is like, this is not worthy the effort. And and there are some communities that they become like kind of closed. They make it so the fact that you learn, that you learn a particular technology or a programming language and it was hard, they wear it as like a badge of honor. It's like, oh yeah, this was hard, but I'm here, right? So you can do it too. And then I'm like, no, it's like, it's like it should be as easy as we can possibly make. Um, but easy and simple as we can possibly make, and not is and it's not like we are going to cut corners. That's not what I'm saying, right? It's not, oh, we are going to put the complexity or going to put the hard things under the carpet. It's not about that, right? It's just about like, look, we are going to welcome you on this journey, and we know we are asking a lot, but you're going to have a good time, you're going to enjoy it, and you're going to learn important things. um, and I think that that attitude from the beginning reflected a lot in the community.
Yeah, and I think that is such an important aspect of it too, because like you know the difficulties of trying to get the word out of a programming language. Like you've been at it now for 12 years, right? So adoption, 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 and you have to have been exhausted and wanting to give up at some points during the last 12 years, unless I'm completely wrong, but I know how hard it is just to like build a brand, let alone a programming language. You want to talk about that journey at all
Yeah,
that you went through, the ups and downs?
actually, I don't think I ever wanted at some point like, I quit, like,
Yeah.
I had enough. I don't think I was ever like close to that at all. But I think like, I mean, of course, there's time that is stressing. Like, that's not saying that I never got stressed, or I overthought things, or had things, or carried things with me. Let's say carried home things with me that I should have let at work. Of course, all those things happen. But I also had like somewhat like good experience with open source before starting Elixir, and I had like, again, like, I did not really set up any expectations that really helped me manage this. And the other thing is that, um, and something that that helps me is that from the very beginning, like if you go back when Elixir started, like our competition, right? I'm saying between quotes here, is was like, Go from Google, right? Like,
Hmm.
competition, I mean the new programming languages that were coming at the time, right? And then like Swift from Apple came later, right? And then F Sharp from Microsoft. So those are all like I'm not sure about Mozilla, but billion or millions of dollars corporations, right? For sure
Mm-hmm.
millions, but potentially billions. Then we're like, look, I can't really compete with this, right? Like there is no way I can put the amount of resources, time, work, people, whatever way you want to slice it, right? And of course, there were other programming languages at the time that they were much, they were like smaller, let's say indie, right? Like Clojure and Elm, right? And Elixir. Of course, there were those as well, but a lot of the big ones they had like very strong corporate backing. And for me, the way again, like the way I saw this was like, look, the best way for these to work is for me to not centralize things, right? Because if I centralize things, I just cannot win, right? At the
Mm-hmm.
time when Elixir started, it was like I was working at Plataforma Tech. We're a Brazilian company. When we started, it was probably like 20, 30 people, right? So so a lot of the things that I also did was like, look, this is decentralized. Like, look, if you want to write a book, like write a book. Don't ask me. If you want to organize an event, just organize an event. If you want to do this, like just make this something that everybody owns. And of course, I still know that I have an important part in the community and that people look up to me and to the work that we are doing. But a lot of it was like I do a lot of work from trying to make to not make it like my thing, right? Or like you see what I mean? And that
Mm-hmm.
helps a lot also like with this idea of of like for me it's like it's really a shared burden. So I don't feel like so overloaded or like burdened by having to deal with everything Elixir.
That makes sense. When you are like, so I know we're like focusing on a lot of the journey because I feel like we kind of have to because it's a big day today. It's Elixir's birthday. When as you like rolled through the year after year, what are like some of the major milestones that you hit that were like the most exciting moments when you're like, this is actually something pretty awesome, and then it gets even cooler and cooler when like more things kind of unravel. What do you have any specific moments in time with that?
Yeah, no, there are several, and I'm not going to be able to recollect them all, but like big ones was when Dave Thomas he announced that he was writing the programming Elixir book, and I think within a week, we also had Simon St. Laurent from O'Reilly announcing that there was a book called Introducing Erlang, and there would be an Introducing Elixir version, and this was before 1.0, so that was very exciting. One of the goals that again I do a lot of goals, but one of the goals that I set at the very beginning, back in 2012, we had a Strange Loop conference that ran for quite some time, and I think last year was the last year of that conference. It was a very popular conference for people interested, like to geek out about programming languages, technologies, and they had a side conference called Emerging Languages Conference. It was a 1 day kind of thing, and I set to myself as a goal to speak there, and it was really nice. And I remember that I don't remember all the programming languages, but I think Julia, Elm, and Elixir we all spoke at this event.
Oh, that's awesome.
So yeah, so it's and I'm pretty sure there is one more that it's also popular in Election Day, but I'm almost sure there's still another one, or maybe even another two. Um, so yeah, so that was nice, and then when the books were announced was nice, and then of course the first Elixir conference, which was in Austin,
When were
and
the books announced? Was that like after 1.0 or before?
it was before. I
Okay.
think it was 2013. I may
Okay.
be wrong. I may be wrong. And then there was the first Elixir conference, uh, 1.0, and then Phoenix, coming. At the time, there was like really kind of like a lot of people they were trying their versions of like web frameworks, and then Phoenix was the one which came out with like fresh ideas, fresh takes on how to fully leverage the Erlang virtual machine to build these real-time applications. Another one that I find very exciting is because like I knew Elixir would be used for web because I was coming from Ruby and Rails, and I knew I didn't want to do it, but I knew it was a matter of time until you know somebody nailed it, and Chris did nail it. And but for me, like it was very exciting when people started doing things with Elixir that I had like no idea or no expectation. And when the Nerves project for embedded software
Mm-hmm.
came out, right? That was very exciting to me because like I literally had no idea. And I was at so we had this Erlang factory event in United States. Today they're called Cold Bean, but back then they were called Erlang Factory. So I was at that event, and Garth he came with a box. I don't remember the size. There are videos with a box like this size, and then he's like, "Look, those boxes, they are running Elixir, and we deploy them to ships that go and stay months, potentially years, right, away, and it's doing this and this and that with Elixir, and it's running this thing called Nerves." And then I met Frank. So to me, that was like really exciting. And 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 after Elixir 1.0, like based on this idea of Elixir like being decentralized, right? Like, everybody should be able to contribute to its growth. I always saw that one of my main roles was to like help the community grow it, right? Like to make sure that me, so a lot of it's meant to be in the design of the language, but make sure that me and the core team, we are not a bottleneck for people who want to build and tackle interesting problems. And yeah, so like seeing every time Elixir is like comes to a new domain, right, and or starts tackling a problem in a completely novel way, right, it's always very exciting. So there's like main brain for audio and video, and there was like the whole idea. I don't know if a lot of people, I would like to see people mention in the chat if was anybody around at the time we were introducing Gen Stage and Broadway. Broadway was quite later, but like we spent like quite some time. Like this was back in 2016.
Okay.
We spent quite some time like improving Elixir for doing this work with data, and eventually it led to Broadway. But that was exciting, and then we got things like LiveView, right? And today, it's still a lot of exciting things happening, right? We have the whole numerical Elixir effort happening, Elixir running on GPUs, running machine learning models. We have Flame, right? And Flame is like, Flame is, Flame is like, it's absurd, right? Because the most amazing thing about Flame, so for those who are not familiar, Flame is like brings you auto scaling to your like Elixir and Phoenix applications. And the most amazing thing about Flame is that it could literally have been implemented like 10 years ago, right? It's
That's
like,
wild.
right? It's like an implementation is super small. Maybe Craig is going to say, well, actually, not 10 years ago. But it's so amazing. Like a lot of the ideas that we are still like doing today, right? It's like, oh, it was always there. It was always there as part of Erlang, more than part of Elixir, really just part of Erlang. And we are still like finding those things out, right? Like
Now
NX could not exist
I
like
might
10
have
years
a really
ago.
dumb
Yeah.
question. Now, Flame, from like what I'm my understanding, I haven't had a chance to really check it out. You kind of can like containerize pieces of your code, like modules, right, and give it more resources and kind of just scale portions of your app. Is that right?
Yeah, so the idea behind Flame is that if you have a part of your code that you want to auto scale, think about it as like a granular auto scaling. Because like when I was talking about the Rails story and how most people they do auto scaling, it's like, look, we are going to start we are going to start like a new copy of that thing, connect that thing to our load balancer, and you're going to start having requests to that thing, right? That's what I
Mm-hmm.
was saying for that story, right? But that's way too high level, right? Because now, like, because imagine, like, usually when you have like performance issues, it's not your whole application. Sometimes your whole application, but sometimes it's like you can have particular features in your application that are very resource hungry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're doing O-ban, right, or using something to process that in the background, at some point you'll be like, look, my queue is too big, right? I want to dynamically start consumers to machines to deal with this queue. So the idea behind Flame is, well, what if there's part of our application that you want auto scale? What if we can auto scale only that part? And the way it works is that we do start your whole application, but you don't have to connect that under the load balancer, right? You don't even have like if the thing you want auto scale is something like video editing, you don't even need to start like database connections because we have control over how our applications start, right? So you just start like your application, but you just make that subset of your application that you're interested on from work, and then because Erlang is distributed, so you start copies of your application, like the parts of your application that you want it to work, and because Erlang is distributed, like okay, this machine go do the work and let me know when you're done, and that's it, right? So the idea is yes, you are starting your application, but it's really granular the amount of thing that you are out scaling, and you have exact control over how that thing starts. While most of the things that are doing auto scaling is just at the proxy level, and you don't really have control or over that, right? You just have to deal with requests.
Right. Well, and a lot of it is like through all these like pass systems, right, where they're just auto scaling on the hardware level too. And then you can get your surprise AWS bills. You always hear your horror stories when you auto scale improperly, right? And I feel
Yeah.
like Flame avoids that even being a problem.
Yeah, you have. I'm not familiar how much control AWS gives you, but Flame would give you control over
Mm-hmm.
like, look, I want to start at most 10 machines, right? And then you can do. But what Flame also does is that it allows you to control. But this AWS also allows to control like how long you want that thing to stay up. Um, but yeah, Flame allows you to say, look, I want at most like X machines, and if they don't get work in like a minute, I want you to bring them down. Um, so so yeah, you get more fine grain control over all those things.
Yeah, no, I love that. So like when the introduction of Phoenix came, that was probably a pretty exciting milestone in the Elixir world. And then especially with like LiveView being introduced, because now you have, you know, a real-time server-side rendered web application stack essentially. Like everything is you have everything at your fingertips to leverage the power of like Erlang and Elixir now. And the reason that I fell in love, like I wasn't a big front end developer. I just started because everyone that followed my YouTube channel, they're like, please do a Phoenix tutorial. And I got talked into it. I wanted to avoid doing front end dev so badly, but I started falling in love with it. And I started seeing the amount of power and like how quick you can create web applications with a small team with just building an Elixir and Phoenix and LiveView. Like you can create quite amazing applications with one developer now instead of needing a whole team of developers, and everything works, you know, in a familiar stack and syntax, and you don't have to really know multiple languages or technologies.
Yeah, for me, I told this story before, but the reason I started doing Rails is because I actually enjoyed doing web development a lot. But this was like almost, yeah, this was 20 years ago. Like my first web application was a website for the band I had in university, and it was done with Macromedia Flash, which is like that technology,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I really enjoyed it, and for and then this was like when this was like we were starting. It was so long ago that like the magic words, like the trending topics at the time was like tableless CSS or tableless design, because back then people would design whole pages just using HTML tables, right? So
Yeah.
this is like how back then this was, right? And then we were Ajax. It was like literally only starting Ajax. So I got the thing at the very beginning, and it was really fun, and I enjoyed a lot because I felt I could do everything. But at the moment like JavaScript started gaining traction, and people really, and then at the time like we're really not talking a lot about JavaScript, we're talking more about the HTML, dynamic HTML. So we're starting to explore those ideas of what it is to build like really interactive applications, right, in HTML. And then JavaScript became like this force, which made sense because that's what we had. Um, and that's what everybody was using. And with time, like building web applications became just so fragmented that I lost complete interest. Like I lost complete interest. And that was one of the things that led me to, to explore things that are happening more behind the scenes or at the low level, like working more on Rails and working on Elixir, because I really lost interest because, I wanted to build an application. I had to do the backend, and then I need to do like JavaScript for the front end, and we were already introducing like precompilers for a language like CoffeeScript. So I had to bring this additional toolchain, and and I mean it makes sense. And I think we're talking about Sass as alternatives to CSS, and LAS as well, and all those things. I mean, they were important because they helped promote change and and help like improve like the underlying technology that we have today, right? To the point that today you can write a lot of CSS, right, without really requiring a preprocessor, and a lot of JavaScript without requiring transpiling. But at that moment, there was like so much complexity, and you were at this point where you are like, oh, you have like the front end and you have the back end, but now those two things are disconnected. And now we have to bring like Selenium. Today we don't use Selenium anymore. We use like something like Playwright, but you have to build like bring this other thing so you can write integration tests between the front end and the back end. And there was like so much complexity to get anything done that I just did not enjoy it anymore. And it was like that really until LiveView. It was with LiveView that I was like, wait, I actually enjoy doing this again, because all this complexity, all those moving pieces, we were finally starting to like, bring the amount of moving pieces down. And of course, I'm not talking about like a lot of the applications, they also needed Redis because you wanted to do PubSub. There are like so many moving pieces. And sometimes I felt like I was crazy because like this thing annoyed me, but it's like, but people will be like, no, this is fine. They're like, oh, no, I know how to deal with those moving pieces. I'm just going to bring a Docker Compose. And they're like, all right, so you want to solve the moving pieces by adding another moving piece. Am I getting this correctly? Is that really the answer to the problem? And, it took a while for us to say, look, actually, you need to go back to when I started in Rails, which is really Phoenix, I believe, is the only technology doing that, saying, look, you actually only need your programming language and a database, right?
Yeah.
Phoenix is the only one that is telling you, those are the two things that you need. You don't need anything else, right?
So
You
I
are,
used to I used to be that developer though. I believed everything should be separated. Like it should be different technologies and like you should have a back end, front end engineer. And it wasn't until I started using, Phoenix LiveView where it just made sense. And it was actually a reason I never wanted to learn Ruby on Rails. I didn't like that everything was I felt like it was tightly coupled. And like now the way I was completely wrong because I think you can do it a right way. And I think that's what LiveView leverages.
yeah. We mentioned my keynote, and one of the things that I say in the keynote is that we have sometimes like this weird obsession with decoupling.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I say is like decoupling is not self-serving, right? You don't say like, look, I want to decouple things, because when you put the things separate, when you decouple them, which is the main benefit, right? Like you introduce this, you have to have this contract, you have to have the things that connect it, right? And now you have to reason about how those two things, they are going to evolve at their own pace because you have decoupled them, and how this contract is going to evolve over time and how you're going to manage it. And if you're talking about front end and back end, you're doing this decoupling over the network layer. And then you have to figure out like what is the contract that are using REST, GraphQL, right? There are so many things. And actually, I think like, I think we do a lot of unnecessary decoupling because we have like, oh, things have to be decoupled. And no, like it makes sense to decouple if you give me like good reasons for that decoupling, right? So maybe you can say, look, the reason why we want to decouple the front end from the back end is because we expect, oh, maybe you are like WhatsApp, right? So you need to build clients on when WhatsApp started on a bunch of different phones and platforms, right? It needs to work in the browser, have a bunch of different clients. So it makes sense for those things to be decoupled, right? But for a lot of applications that we write, we are just introducing this huge barrier, all this contract and this decoupling in our code for really no benefit. For we are just giving ourselves more work to do, more things to manage, and with literally nothing to gain from it.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people, like a lot of teams, they forget how much like resources are expensive. And if you have a small team and you're spreading everyone across all these different code bases and platforms, you're going to move a lot slower than you expect to move too. And I think for whatever reason, we're hardwired to think we have to decouple everything because you want everything, like you worry, like what if I want to change my front end technology? That's always what's wired into my head, right? What if something changes with whatever I'm using on the front end and I need to abandon it or add another one? So you're like wired to think decoupling is a good thing because then you can just, plug in something new later.
Yeah, but on the other side, it's like after you do that, you know, enough times, you realize, oh, the most, the things that is going to happen the most is that one, you do things decoupled, but never any component is really replaced in isolation. Usually what happens is that you're going to replace everything, or what is going to happen is that they're going to try to replace a component, and but realize that even for you try to decouple, those things had a bunch of implicit couplings in different places, and replacing just one component, it's not easy anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree
You de-
completely.
because you decoupled things with this imaginary idea of what something that is going to happen that does not actually mirror what actually happens in the
Yeah.
future, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, when you first start building stuff, you have all these scenarios made up in your mind too. And a lot of them are never going to be a thing.
Yeah, like, so for example, going back to Acto, right? Like there are a lot of things to talk to the database that they try to be like a lowest common denominator kind of thing. Oh, we need to do something that works well for all databases in case you want to replace all databases. But it's like you can't really, right? It's like, if you are completely migrating a database, because look, if you are small, then sure, maybe you can completely replace database and everything just works, right? But if you're small, why are you replacing your database in the first place? Like there is
Hmm.
usually no reason, right? And then if you're big, it's like, well, we're replacing the database because we have these very specific issues. And then you have to migrate to something that's going to specifically tackle those issues that you can't do if all you have is like it's the lowest common denominator kind of thing. So like for Acto, like we're like, look, we don't want to do the lowest common denominator kind of thing. We want to allow you to specialize to databases and leverage your databases as strongly as you can. Exactly because of all it's based on these ideas and these discussions of coupling and decoupling.
Yeah. 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 That's good. So I saw, was it this morning that you tweeted a pretty exciting tweet, you have a release candidate for
Yes.
1.17.
Yes, 1.17 is out. It's a release candidate, so everybody, please try it out. If you find any bugs, please do report them. There is a thread on the Elixir forum as well if you want to leave notes. But yeah, one of the we can check the change log. But one of the most exciting things is that our work on the type system. This is the first Elixir release that has some ideas and implementations of the type system work that we have been exploring for almost 3 years. So again, I thought a lot about this. It's nothing really in your
Uh-oh. I lost you in OBS. 1 second, guys. Let me see. I might have to just... Guys, I'm going to pause this and I got to fix Jose. 1 second. No. Technical difficulties live. Not cool. All right, guys, I'm pausing you again. Refresh. Hey, I got you back. All right, we're back.
I'm back.
You're back. All right.
All right, everybody. So those were the great things I wanted to share with you about 1.17. I hope you heard it all, and see you next time. I'm kidding.
Yeah,
No.
guys, he just explained everything about the theoretic types. So see you guys.
Yeah, no. I'll start again, right? So Elixir 1.17. Elixir 1.17. It's the release candidate is just out, so please give it a try. And the big feature announcement in this release is that we have began like bringing the work that we have been exploring about set theoretic types to the Elixir compiler. So what this release is doing is that we are looking at some patterns, not even guards. We are looking at some patterns, like when you're pattern matching things, we are inferring types based on the pattern. And then if you do something that we know it's wrong, there is a bug, we are going to emit a warning. So for example, if you pattern match on a struct, and then you try to access a field that does not exist, we are going to emit a warning. Or if you build something for a binary and you give the wrong type. So there are very specific constructs that we are doing right now. We are dealing with atoms, binaries, and maps primarily.
Okay.
But it is the beginning. It is the beginning. And there are like 7 or 8 different kinds of warnings that you would get today. So it's really nice. It's really exciting. But it's just the beginning. And the idea is that with every release, we are going to introduce more warnings. We are going to infer more types in order to find more bugs in the code. And the idea for now is that you don't have to use type annotations or anything. You're just going to do all those things automatically. And yeah, that's one of the big features in there. Did anybody check out the release notes in the chat? Anybody has like a favorite feature outside of types?
Yeah, if anyone has questions, now's the time to throw them up, and we got...
Yeah, did you check already or not yet? Because I just released it, so it's very understandable if not.
I have the
a lot
notes
of
up,
people
and
have
I started reading through them this morning personally, and
Yeah.
I've seen some of your tweets and some other people's tweets about the like kind of the type system, and I love that it's just kind of like subtle compile warnings right now, because I think
Yeah.
that's kind of a good way to slowly introduce things as well.
Yeah, my idea is that if anybody doesn't like the work, basically what we're getting is warning for free. That's what we're getting. It's like, look, we're finding bugs for free, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their messages, they're really, really good. We have been really careful with those. So we are finding bugs for free. So the idea is that for those first steps, there should be like no controversy at all. If there's controversy, it's because we messed something up. Like we in the Elixir team, we messed something up, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like so this should be a strict win for everybody, and we'll see if that's going to be the case. But I feel very confident so far.
So we have a question from Andrew. He's curious what your favorite feature in the release outside of types is, or something that's coming down the pipeline.
Oh, that's really good, isn't it? Like he got my question and he turned that against me. It's like,
Yeah, he got you.
uh, yeah, he got me. So now I have to open the
Now
can
you have to
again.
talk about the release notes.
Yes, right? Really good, really good. So let me see if I can let me take a quick. Well, so there's the new duration type. Um, so that's a really interesting one, and it's one of the things that it looks so simple, um, but it's like somebody's going to look at it like, why did it take Elixir? Because we introduced calendar types what
Mm-hmm.
7 years ago maybe. And then somebody can be like, why did it take so long for Elixir to introduce this? But like to get it right, because Elixir we support multiple calendars. You can actually use the Elixir calendar modules with the Japanese calendar or a Chinese calendar, for example. So we support multiple calendars in multiple time zones. And now imagine that you want to shift months or years across multiple calendars and across multiple time zones. There are so many cases and things that can go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a contributor, Theodore, if I remember his name correctly, that he's like, okay, I am owning this issue and I am bringing it home. And he did. And it was like a long discussion, potentially the longest discussion in GitHub issues. And he did everything. He went through all the concerns. We discussed all the corner cases, and I'm really happy with the API that we came up with. Because the thing about like daytime is that it's so easy to just assume that things work in a certain way, but that's not how they work at all, right? It's like it's very easy for you to make a wrong assumption, and then at the end you're going to present the user with like an invalid date time, for example. So we have always been careful about the Elixir calendar types to to not make those pitfalls accessible, right? To make it clear that there are those pitfalls. And I think we're able to arrive at a really good design for the duration type that is coming in the next Elixir release. And the other exciting thing about this is that this was the last feature that that I wanted to have with calendar types. Because when we added like the calendar types, like date, time, naive date time, and date time to Elixir,
Mm-hmm.
we had two libraries, one called calendar and the other called timex, and they had like this huge collection of features, right? And with time, we started like slowly bringing them, and this was the last one that I thought like this was missing. We eventually have to tackle it. So this was the last one. The only thing that we don't do right now in Elixir, there are actually two things, one and a half, let's say. So one that we don't do is daytime parsing, because doing daytime parsing properly, which is like depending on the localization of the user, this is actually extremely complex. So we
Mm-hmm.
just do like the basic ISO 8601 parsing. That's what we do. Um, yeah, so we don't tackle the parsing problem because it's a really large problem in itself. And then there are libraries like CLDR that
Mm-hmm.
do those things well. And formatting, we have a simple formatting that is not localized. So that's why I think we solve it by half. We do like a simple formatting where you control, but we don't have the understanding of like we say, oh, users from Brazil, how should I show dates to them? And that's also something that is solved by CLDR. But other than that, I think Elixir can now solve all the like it has the infrastructure to solve everything else. So that's
Yeah,
very
that's great.
exciting.
We do have a question. So after 1.17 release, can you delete the dialyzer?
Mm, oh, very debatable. So because like I mean, I personally don't use Dialyzer because I don't make mistakes. No, I personally don't use Dialyzer because for me it's like personally again your village may vary. Personally, I don't find it justifies the return over investment. You know, that's my personal. I know different people they enjoy it, they have different experiences. So, like if you asked me, I would be like, well, maybe, maybe uh, you should not be using Dialyzer in the first place. But if you're using Dialyzer, I assume it's because you. I'm just going to refresh my camera very quickly. Uh,
There you go. Oh,
yeah. So, but I
I
assume that if
have
you're using
PTSD.
Dialyzer,
It flashed black for a second, and I was like, "Oh no, OBS
oh
lost
yeah,
him again."
so, but if you're using Dialyzer, I assume it's because you like what you get from it, and the type system is not. It's not a place to replace Dialyzer yet, and it's potentially going to take. Let's say, like again, I don't like working with deadlines nor anything, but let's say 2 years before you can say, oh, like before, because as the Elixir compiler start giving you more warnings, then the return that the Allies is going to give you is going to become smaller because you get that from the compiler too. So yeah, maybe in 2 years, then the return is so minimal that does not justify it.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, guys. Any other questions for Jose? We got him trapped right now.
Yeah. So I'm taking a look at the change log as well to see if there is anything. This is still like like it's a looking at the change log. I mean, Elixir releases they have the last several releases they have all been like this. They have been like relatively small, and this change log also feels very small in terms of features, which is good because there's not a lot changing.
I feel like
And I
that's
think
always a good thing because then you're not introducing too many
yeah,
potential bugs, right?
yeah, potential bugs or like new things for people to learn. I think sometimes people treat like programming languages as like technology, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily programming languages and frameworks, but like technology, like you know like phone, right? They're like or like or movies. It's like almost entertainment. You're like, oh, there's a new release, new features. They're like, no, it's like, no, like, don't, right? It
Yeah.
should, it should be like new features. Are they really worth it? It's like, what are they asking me to relearn or to rethink or to potentially, because every feature that we add, it's something that your coworker may use and that
Mm-hmm.
you will have to understand and you have to debug. So I think sometimes they're like too enthusiastic about new features in programming languages and frameworks. And I think we definitely need a more a higher dose of like,
Yeah.
really, you know?
So
Um,
I have a question too. Before we're starting to get a bunch of questions in the chat, which is cool. But are there
nice.
any like specific languages that you personally follow for inspiration to or just want to keep an eye on, and maybe you move features into Elixir that you like from other places?
So, I mean, of course, I strongly follow Erlang and I try to contribute whenever I can. So that's by far the language that I closely follow. But I'll be honest and say that I don't do that as much, nowhere as much as I did back then. If I'm looking at other languages, I am usually looking at like particular ecosystems without those languages.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, um, mm, like for example, when we started the whole machine learning thing, I looked into a lot of Python code, a lot of Python libraries, And then when we started doing LiveBook for like programming notebooks, they are programming notebooks in different languages.
Hmm.
So I started looking at those across different languages. So it's more like with a specific purpose rather than like looking at the language
So you need like a
themselves.
research-driven project, and that will drive you to kind of find other technologies.
Yeah,
Like
it's
I'm
usually
guessing like Jupyter Notebook and things like that helped inspire what LiveBook is today.
yes, yes. It's more narrow. While at the
Hmm.
beginning when I was telling that story, I was really looking at the programming languages. Yeah.
All right, let's start going through some of these questions. How do you, let's see, what about Gleam? Um, what about it? Let's see if I, you can skip this question if you want. What about Gleam? I see your company is also one of its sponsors. Yeah, so how do you feel about Gleam and influencing
Yeah.
languages like Gleam?
Um, just one correction. I don't think Dashbit is one of Gleam sponsors, but just want to get that straight so there is no confusion. We don't get credit where yeah. But I think it's exciting. I think we don't have like it's nice. So when we think about the Erlang VM being an ecosystem, right, of different programming languages, I don't think we ever had anything like Gleam, right? Like with the specific design goals and purposes of Gleam. And so I think that's important, right? And I don't think like Elixir or Erlang will ever evolve to overlap Gleam. So what I mean by that is that it will always have like its own purpose in there because it brings a different set of trade-offs and characteristics. So I think that's exciting, and I think it's good for the platform. It's good for Beam. Um,
Yeah, it's definitely good for the Erlang community, and you know, which is good for the Elixir community, right? Because it will be a trickle down effect if things are added to Erlang, which
yeah.
I love. All right, Andrew has another question. He's curious what you think of, like, when you think of Elixir, what is quote unquote still missing?
So for me, so yeah, so there are a couple questions. I look at the question as well, but we can still go through them. But there are, so for me, like for quite some time, I always say like it's never about me and what I feel Elixir is missing. Most of the time when people ask me what Elixir is missing, so if you go back even like 5, 6 years, when people would ask me what was missing in Elixir, I would always just echo the community feelings about what is missing in Elixir. And I think that's what we should continue to do, right? So it's not really a question, it's really a community question. So, for example, Elixir 1.6, which probably 7 years ago, something like that, right? We brought the code formatter. And at the time, if you asked me if I was in favor of code formatting, I would be like, no, no way, right? Like there is a very clear way to format code and that's how I format it, right? So there's no need for a formatter. And
Wait,
but then
are you a tab guy or spaces guy?
right, yeah. So it's and then the community was like, look, we need a formatter, right? And then we were starting to have discussions in the Elixir team as well, where somebody would write a pull request and they'll be like, well, the style, it was always this dilemma because I don't want to be telling people like, hey, that's the style you should write code, and this style it completely comes out of my head, right? So we started to have like these discussions in the Elixir team as well. And then I was like, look, yeah, we definitely need a formatter, but the bigger push came from the community. And then when we added releases in Elixir 1.9, it was also because the community was asking for a better deployment experience, right? And I think today, like if you look at the community and they say like, look, what could be improved? It's going to be typing and language server. I think those are the two big things that could be improved.
Language
And
server
we,
would be a big one. That would be good.
yes, like improve the IDE experience. And the things like Elixir, I think people like underestimate how much work the language server stuff
Oh, I'm
actually
sure it is
is.
so difficult.
Like, yeah, like people like because they look at things like, like I believe it was Microsoft where they had the whole new implementation of the compiler and the runtime, right, to
Hmm.
have a better language server experience for the core .NET languages, right? Like that's a huge amount of work. And people see like some programming languages like having really good language server, and kudos to them, but that's
Hmm.
because it's really like a huge amount of work.
Yeah, no,
And
I'm sure it is.
yeah, so and we have been improving things in Elixir. So like I'm not sure if there's one in this release, but if you look at Elixir 1.15, 1.14, there are improvements in Elixir to make the life of language server developers easier. But it's still a lot of work. It's still
Yeah.
a huge amount of work. And we'll continue helping where we can. We have discussions in the issues tracker about improving that. And yeah, and the types, right? Which is also like a huge amount of work, right? We have been working on it for almost 3 years, doing research, right? And now we are starting the actual development work. And it has been almost 3 years already, I believe. Three? No, two. Anyway, it's a good amount of time, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
uh, with a PhD student working on it full time. So, but it feels in a way it's different, right? Like code for matter, we could work in 6 months and ship it, right? But it's a different set of problems when we are at a point. It's like, oh, the problems that we need to address now. It's like when we talk about a type system, it's literally at the bleeding edge of like research and technology. Like we have literally developed like new typing techniques so we can support the Elixir type system. And it's completely different and another kind of work that is exciting.
Yeah, no, I love that. So Roger has a pretty good question. He asked, let's see. No, I just lost the one. Any suggestions to help make it easier for companies to adopt Elixir? How can we increase jobs for juniors, for example? All right, I have a great answer for this. You have to start your own company and build it in Elixir.
No, yeah, actually, because when or with time, we are going to have continue having more experienced Elixir developers who are going to take like senior positions where you can say, look, which happens today, I'm sure, where they'll be like, look, I really think Elixir is the technology that we should be using here. Because the truth is, a lot of those decisions, they are not about technology at all,
Hmm.
right?
Well, I talk about this all the time. I have another podcast where we try to educate like non-technical founders that are creating apps, because you always see it like when you're, a freelancer or contract worker, you always hear the horror stories where they hire a dev shop that like doesn't deliver what they promise and they take all their money. So we want to educate people like how you actually find good developers or good dev shops to work with. But yeah, the now I forgot what we were just talking about. The adoption
About
of.
yeah, so people, when it happens when there's like a CTO or somebody
Oh
comes
yeah,
and
you always pick. It's always the go-to language is what's popular now, not the best fitting technology. Like so many people pick, Node.js as their back end because that's what everyone is using. Everyone picks React for the front end because that's what everyone's using. They're not actually leveraging what's good about those technologies for their specific product. So if you actually like dig deep and you're choosing a technology stack that fits your project perfectly, people wouldn't just be choosing the popular choices.
yeah, but I think uh, I think that's never going to happen.
No, it's
It's
not.
it Yeah, right. And it's always going to be about community. in the sense of like of a community sense, like like because the technology is here, right? Like Erlang is here for like almost 4 decades, I think, right? And it has been stable, it has been reliable, it powers a huge amount of the internet that we use today, right? So the technology is there, all the technological arguments are there. And really, what if you want to say, look, so Roger is like, look, there's a company in Brazil, and they are moving away from Elixir. Really, the big question is, where is the community? Where is the community in
Mm-hmm.
Brazil, right? Because that's how those things are going to happen. It's part of it's going to be popularity, and yes, Elixir is never going to be as popular as JavaScript, right? There's just no way, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's a reality that should be clear to everybody. But the thing that is going to maintain those things is going to be people. It's people. It's a people thing. It's a people problem. So where is the community? When you're meeting, when you're talking to each other, when you're exchanging ideas, right? That those are the things that are going to make the technology stay. Because again, like the technological arguments, they are here, right?
Yep.
And we have historically used the technology arguments well to convince people. A lot of people that they get started with Elixir, right? It's because of the tech stuff, right? And that's part of the excitement. But we need to convert that into other kinds of excitements, right? Into
Yep.
those human relationships and into the community.
Well, like just conversations like this and more people teaching, making tutorials, making it more accessible so your learning curve isn't so hard. Because if you're coming from an object oriented background, you have a lot to learn. And then when you start like throwing processes and gen server and all this other things, like you have a lot to understand. And so breaking down that barrier and making adoption easier is probably one of the only ways to, start, because like I learned Elixir because you hear all the trigger points, concurrency, fault tolerance, like all those things. And I was like, yeah, that's what I need. But did I truly understand it until I like really started diving in? Not really. But that's what got my attention. And that's why I started learning it. And once I understood those is why I stuck with it. So I think it's a good choice, especially for small development teams to start building products, especially if it's a web application. Like there's really no reason why you shouldn't leverage what you get out of the box with Elixir. And development speeds too. Like you can turn around and create like an MVP in a week or less, really, depending on what your feature list is.
Yeah, yeah.
All
So
right.
there is a question from David, I believe. Is this the case of numerical computing suggesting any upstream changes to the language? And I love this question because when we came out with an X, it really like we were able to get Elixir compile it to run on the GPU, and it required one small addition to the language, was one function in the module called module. I believe it's called get definition, the function. That's it, right? So I think it really attests to the power of Elixir to being extensible to new domains. The fact that in order to do everything that we have been doing with an X, right? All we need to do really, like for the launch when we announced an X, was to add a single function. Um, and I love it. I think it's very exciting. So yeah, we didn't have to do many changes. The only other change that we did in addition to that was to add steps to ranges, I believe. I
Okay.
believe before ranges, yeah, ranges they could or be increasing or decreasing. So they would go up or down, but always by one. And now we have this idea of steps, so you can step in every two elements, let's say, right? So I can do things like 1, 3, 5, and 7, because those kind of things they are a bit more common when you're working in numerical computing. You want to have this idea, say, look, every odd, I want to have every odd row of this matrix, right? Or every even column of this matrix. So we added steps. But that's it, those are, and we didn't really have to add steps. I could introduce like a stepped range inside the numerical Elixir library and keep that as separate. But it made sense to make that part of the language so everybody could rely on that. But yeah, like really tiny changes to the language, and I don't think, yeah, and I don't think it's requiring anything else.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Just small little changes to adopt and adapt. I mean, I think that shows that you built a solid foundation too, when you don't have to change a lot to adopt new ideas.
Yeah, I think so, and it goes back to that discussion, right? Like that foundation was important exactly because I want everything in Elixir to be decentralized. I don't want people to, to have to change the like send pull requests. I mean, I love when people send pull requests, but I don't want people to like, oh, I want Elixir to be good for this, but now I need to change Elixir first and have Elixir support what I want to do before I can actually do this thing that can be really valuable to the community.
Hmm. Um, so I know you said you don't look ahead too much. You focus on the now, but do you have any vision for the future of Elixir and what you see coming, or are you just focused on types and kind of what you're currently working on?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. For me, it's types. So it's the things that I'm working on, right? So the things that I'm working on lately is in Elixir itself, it's types and the language server stuff. But again, it's a very small part of the language server work just to support the language server developers.
Hmm.
Um, and then somebody mentioned I'm also involved in Livebook and in the numerical elixir stuff, but they're also getting like quite stable. So even there, I'm not expecting a lot of changes. I think the biggest changes are definitely going to, if they happen, they're going to be driven by the type system for sure.
All right. So I think like with my channel, actually I have a pretty wide range. I have a lot of like really talented Elixir developers, but I also get a lot of new Elixir developers. Do you have any advice to developers that are new to Elixir to maybe help them, adopt the language?
That's it's a very wide question. We can talk a lot about different things. I'm going to take you can do follow-ups. I'm
Okay.
going to take this on a very specific angle, which is how to grow personally as a developer. And I'm going to say what worked for me. It's not necessarily what works for everybody, but for me, it's mostly reading other people's code. So whenever like I install, like, so this was when I was learning to program, for example. Whenever I install like a dependency into my project, I would read the source code, right?
Hmm.
And I would not understand all of it for sure, right? But I would read the source code and I would learn a thing or two, or maybe if I wanted to send a pull request, because I read that source code when I installed it, I would already have an idea on how to improve and or how to exchange or how to improve and how to change that package to accommodate my needs. So for me, that's one of the big things to how you can grow as a developer and learn more and learn how to master. And of course, you're going to read good code and you're going to read bad code. And at the beginning, you may not know exactly what is good code and what is bad code. But as you read, as you see the practice, you're going to get a feeling like, oh, it seems like this code is doing something similar to that other package, but it's much clearer now. I can understand it much easier. And that's always a good sign, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're new and there's something that it's clear to you, uh, uh, being new, it's potentially a very good indicator that that's good code.
Yeah, I
Um,
like reading other people's code, especially if they're a better developer than you or they write, just cleaner code. you'll learn so much more going through someone's repository or code base than you will picking up an Elixir book. From my obviously, I think you should read Elixir books, especially if you're learning the basics and core concepts. But when you read other people's code, I'll look at people's code and be like, do I even know how to program? And you can just learn so much, just even from like how to design a project and, organize modules, use gen servers, leverage processes or pub sub, whatever you're doing. You can learn a lot of things just reading looking at how other people implemented their solutions for a problem.
Yeah, and today we have the advantage of using something like ChatGPT. Even though like there is a report that just came out that ChatGPT is giving inaccurate things like 35 or 40, 40 high something percent of the time.
Oh,
But
wow.
it,
I heard that
yeah,
ChatGPT can't tell you it doesn't know, so it'll just make answers up.
yes, it does. It does that. It's really great. Like you can easily force it to come up like with stories that are not true. So like if you say, "Oh, this thing happened," which did not happen at all.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's the case? And it just comes up with like it's not going to say, oh, "Wait, this thing did not happen." But yeah, but when you give it code and you ask it to explain, like I don't think you should take ChatGPT answer like for granted. But before, if you look at some code, didn't understand it, right? You would have to maybe go to a forum and then wait for somebody to reply. And
Mm-hmm.
today, GPT can at least give you some pointers that you can validate, and that helps also. But yeah, like the thing that I would say is like, don't get like, don't necessarily try to understand every single line of code, right? It's like, I'm going to tell this story. It's actually a fascinating story, which was one of the best lessons I've learned in my life. So this was in Brazil, like in high school. It's 3 years. So I was on the second year of high school, and this was actually English classes. So the English teacher, uh, he comes he comes to the classroom, and then he writes some text in the blackboard, right? He writes some English text, blah 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 blah. Like he writes a story, and then he likes, look, I want everybody to to write down what you understood from this. And when I come back, we're going to have a discussion about it. And he leaves the room. He leaves the room, right? And what he did, and what he did is that when he wrote the text, he introduced words that does not actually exist. But I did not know, right? Like this is in Brazil, right? We do not speak English. So he introduced words that do not actually exist, right? And this is genius because like there were people where they would have like private teachers teaching them English, so they were like really good with English, right? And now even these people who were doing like private lessons for like 2 3 years, they started panicking. So I had a friend and I was like, what does that mean? And then she was like, I don't know, right? Everybody was panicking, right? Because he introduced those words. And then he came back, right? Like after 30 minutes of panic, full classroom panic, everybody's like, oh, we are screwed, right? Like everybody feeling like I actually don't know anything. He comes back and he's like, all right, let's try to understand this together. And then what he does that he goes through the text, and then whenever there is a word that he came up with, he's like, actually, I don't know what this word means, but even if I ignore it, I can understand the rest of the text. I can understand the meaning of this, even if I don't know what this is doing particularly,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then he just went through the text, right? And this was like a huge lesson in the sense, like, look, it was a huge lesson because especially like we had to prepare for like exams entering university, which is like, look, you don't have to understand every single thing that is written in the text. You can probably look at it and try to get the general idea. And I think like it was genius, and it applies to code as well. We don't have to go to the code and try to understand all of the pieces necessarily. Like the first time you go through it, try to get the general idea. And then if you need, we have tools. Like if there is a part that you don't understand, at least we as a developers, we have tools. We can put a debugger, right? We can try to inspect, we can try to
Mm-hmm.
look at it and understand, right? But we don't have to like when we are going and reading other people's code say, I understand everything, right? A lot of the time, especially on the first passes or when we are learning, getting this idea is it's enough and it's going to teach you a lot.
I I love that, and I think that's actually a fantastic story because yeah, if you can grab and understand pieces of something, at least you're still getting the majority of the story, and you can
Yep.
kind of piece it together, and then you'll probably slowly but surely figure out what that piece is.
Yeah.
That's good. That is good. I mean, I think honestly, with that, that's a pretty good way to end this. Um, I want to thank you so much for coming on this with me. It's a lot of fun, and I feel very honored that I got you on the 12th birthday because I feel like that's a big day. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Jose. It was awesome meeting you. It was awesome chatting with you, and I will say, like your your energy and the way that every time I see you speak, you have a really good way of passing along your excitement to your audience. And I think that is an incredible skill. And I honestly, I think you were made to create a programming language and spread the word for it because you do a great job. And um, I appreciate all the work that you've done and like what your team has done. You're doing amazing things.
Thank you. Thanks for the very kind words and thanks for having me here. And yeah, I hope everybody have a great weekend ahead. Give Elixir 1.17 a try and let us know how it goes.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to spin it up this afternoon, I think. So that'll be
All right.
fun. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next live stream. Testing.